It is October 1307, and you run the Order of the Temple. In England and Wales, your brothers hold 130 working farms in hand, about 34,400 acres of plowland, with the sheep, the barns, and the grain that go with them. 9 months ago, the King of France fled a riot in his own streets and slept inside your Paris house. And on none of that ground do you pay a penny of tithe to any bishop or tax to any king. There is exactly one authority on earth you answer to. In 4.5 years, all of it is gone, and no court ever writes down why. Start with what the job actually is on a Tuesday. You are not a soldier this morning. You are a landlord. Somewhere in Lincolnshire, a bailiff is counting hurdles. In Yorkshire, a reeve is arguing with a carter over the price of hauling wool to the coast. In Paris, a clerk is writing a receipt for money that belongs to somebody else and is lying in your strong room because there is no safer floor in France. The white mantle with the red cross on the shoulder is real. The men who wear it are real, and most of the order's day is rent. At dawn on 13 October 1307, the king's officers break the seals on orders written 5 weeks earlier and never discussed. In every bailiwick in France, the same morning happens at the same hour. In Paris, they take the master of the order and about 139 of his brothers out of the temple and into custody before the city is properly awake. There is no fighting. Across a kingdom full of Templar houses, held by men whose entire trade was the defense of fortified positions, not one is defended. The doors are opened. The brothers walk out. 4.5 years later, at the Council of Vienne, a bull is read out, and the order stops existing. On an island in the Seine in 1314, 2 men are burned. One morning, one document, one fire. Everybody who has ever told this story names the same killer, and the case against him is strong. Philip the Fair had spent a decade running France on bad money. Between November 1296 and Christmas 1299, his mints returned 1,419,000 livres parisis to the crown, against war costs of 1,066,000 livres parisis across the same window. The mint was not a department of that state. It was its largest single source of income, and it worked by putting less silver in each coin than the coin claimed to contain. Then, in June 1306, he stopped. The silver went back to the standard of 1,285, and the debased coin of 1,303 was cut by 2/3. Every debt in France became payable in strong money overnight. 6 months after that ordinance came the riot you have already seen him run from. He had also expelled the Jews of France that summer and taken their goods in August. By 1307, he was running out of people left to confiscate. So start with the man everyone convicts and give him the fairest hearing you can. Here is the part that surprises almost everyone. The treasure is not in the record. Take the one national schedule that survives in full. When the King of England's clerks walked through every Templar house in his kingdom and wrote down what was in it, the whole holding came to £4,720. Not 4,720 pounds of coin in a cellar. 4,720 pounds of everything. Land, stock, buildings, standing crops, the lot. And across the whole of the British Isles, those same inventories list 53 silver spoons. 53. That is the portable silver of an institution that had been receiving gifts since 1139. 2 caveats before you do anything with that, because they matter. Those are English and British figures, not French ones, and Philip's own count of what his men found in Paris does not survive in the same shape. And a seizure inventory undervalues standing land always, because it prices what can be carried away. But the English schedule is the best surviving count anybody has of what a Templar province was actually worth, and it is not a hoard in a cellar. Now follow what Philip ended up holding. In 1312, the bull ad providam handed every former Templar property to the Hospitallers, with 4 Iberian realms excepted, not to the Crown of France, to the rival order. The land he had spent 5 years seizing went to the other military order in Christendom. What Philip got was a bill he wrote himself. A settlement of 200,000 livres tournois, and then a further 60,000 in expenses he discovered afterwards. 260,000, all told, claimed against the estate before the property went where the Pope had sent it. And no, I am not going to set that against the English figure. Livre tournois and pounds sterling are different money, in different kingdoms, with different silver in them. Adding them or dividing one by the other produces a number that feels precise and means nothing. They stay in separate columns. 5 years of arrests, hearings and burnings. For a reimbursement. So greed explains the timing. It explains why a king who had just run out of Jews and bad coin turned to an order that paid him nothing. It does not explain the one thing that actually needs explaining. Why it worked. Kings had gone at the order before and come away with nothing to show for it. If you want the rest of the autopsy, subscribe. The next 3 suspects each have an alibi, and one of them is airtight. The next one has the best motive of all, and it hit both orders equally. Suspect 2 is the one the order would have named itself. The product was gone. Acre, the last real city of the Kingdom of Jerusalem, fell on the 18th of May 1291 after a siege of 45 days. The master of the temple, William of Beaujeu, died in the fighting. Not on a ship, not in a retreat. In the street, in the city, at the end. Acre was not a symbol, it was the head office. The convent was there, the treasury was there, the command was there, and the entire reason for collecting rent in Kent and Aragon and the Languedoc was there. When the city went, the temple lost the address that everything else had been pointing at for as long as it had existed. The mechanism was an annual charge on every house, remitted overseas. I want to be careful here, because the rate people quote for the temple does not come from the temple. The Templars' own statutes on this do not survive in a form that gives you a number. What survives is the hospitals, where the yearly impost on each house, the responsion, runs at about 1/3 of net income, and the temple is read as having worked the same way. Take that as the shape of the arrangement, not as an audited figure. Whatever the rate was, the destination was Palestine, and after 1291, the order kept holding what was left of it. Then Ruad, a rock off the Syrian coast granted to the Templars by the Pope in 1301, held with a standing garrison under its marshal. It surrendered on the 29th of September 1302. That was the last Crusader ground in the Levant. The charge had been written for houses in the Holy Land. After 1302 there were none. So the case writes itself. A charitable operation whose cause has ended. Money still coming in for a destination that no longer exists. A decade of that. What you have is a fundraising machine with nowhere to send the money, and a great deal of expensive nowhere to explain to the men who gave you the fields. Here is where the case breaks. The Hospitallers were in the same city, same siege, same walls, same week. Their master, Jean de Villiers, was speared between the shoulder blades in the final assault and carried down to a ship in the harbor. What was left of his convent got out to Cyprus. They lost the same head office on the same afternoon. Their income came from the same kind of European estates, given by the same kind of donors, for the same reason, which had just stopped being true. 2 orders, 1 war, 1 defeat. The identical problem on the identical day in the same collapsing port. Suspect 3 is the one that ended their lives, which is exactly why it feels like the one that ended the order. The charges were read out in October 1307, and they were enormous: denying Christ, spitting on the cross, obscene initiation, idols. Under interrogation, with the machinery available to a 14th century inquiry, men confessed to all of it. Understand what that machinery was for. It was not built to find out whether something happened. It was built to obtain an admission, and an admission was proof. A man who confessed and repented could be reconciled to the church. A man who confessed and then withdrew the confession was a relapsed heretic, and there was only one outcome for that. So the moment a Templar said yes, the trap closed on both directions at once. Keep the confession and the order is guilty. Take it back and you burn. A number of them took it back anyway. Now go to Chinon in August 1308. The Pope sends 3 cardinals to hear the master and the senior leadership of the order in person, away from the king's officers. They hear the confessions, they hear the retractions, and they absolve them of heresy formally in a document that was written down and kept. Set that against what everyone assumes happened, which is that a church court found the Templars guilty. No church court ever did. Here is what the bull of 1312 actually does. It suppresses the order by apostolic provision, an administrative act taken to end the scandal, and it says in terms that this is not a definitive sentence of guilt. The order is not condemned. The order is abolished. Those are different things, and the document is careful about the difference in a way that almost nobody since has been. A condemnation would have required proof that survived examination, and the examination kept producing the wrong answer. An abolition required only that the order had become impossible to continue, which by 1312 was simply a description of the facts on the ground. So the heresy case is real as a weapon and empty as a cause. It gave a king a charge no bishop could ignore and no ally could defend in public. It never established that the order had done anything, because no tribunal was ever allowed to finish asking. Which brings back the thing left hanging at the start. If nobody convicted them and the Pope's own commissioners absolved them, what actually removed the order? Not the verdict. There wasn't one. Suspect 4 is the modern-sounding one, and it has the best paperwork behind it. They stopped being soldiers. They became landlords. And landlords do not survive contact with a determined king. On the evidence taken at the seizure, that is close to true. In England and Wales, the order held about 34,400 acres of cultivable land, running through 130 demes it farmed in hand. Work it out, and that is something like 265 acres to a demesne. A substantial working farm, each one with everything a farm needs and everyone a farm needs. Most English houses had 4 brothers in them or fewer, and a great many were leased out with nobody of the order living there at all. 4 men, a manor, a rent day. Picture what those 4 men actually did. They kept the accounts of a mixed farm. They ran a wool clip and argued about the price of it. They took rents in cash and in kind, chased the ones that did not arrive, held a court for their tenants, maintained a mill, and sent a surplus up the line to a provincial officer who sent it further. The chapel got its offices set in it, morning and night, by whoever was in orders. Nothing about that day involves a horse, a lance, or a Saracen. What kind of operation this really was shows up in the accounts the crown's own keepers rendered after taking it over. I am flagging that clearly. Those are royal administration years, not the order's own books. In the Michaelmas year beginning 1308, under the king's keepers, those same fields went in with about 8,850 quarters of grain sown. Of the harvests taken off them in the years that followed, no more than 12.3% was distributed to the people who actually worked the ground. That is not a garrison. That is an agricultural business with a chapel attached, and the men in white mantles are mostly management. Here is what none of it explains. Go back to Ruad. The garrison was still standing there and still dying there under its marshal in 1302. 11 years after Acre, with no crusade coming and nothing to hold the rock for, men from this supposedly soft and comfortable order were on it until the Mamluks took it off them. And there is a simpler problem with the whole suspect. The hospital farm too. It had estates, rent rolls, bailiffs, barns, and the same difficulty of a mission on the far side of the Mediterranean from its income. Being a landlord did not kill it, which is now the pattern. The obvious suspect never got the money. The strategic one hit both orders on the same day. The legal one never produced a verdict. And the cultural one describes the survivor exactly as well as it describes the corpse. So the thing that killed the temple has to be something the hospital did not have. The killer is not a person. It is a permission. On the 29th of March, 1139, Pope Innocent II issued a bull called Omne Datum Optimum, and it did something no other religious body in Europe had. It lifted the order out of every jurisdiction on earth but one. No bishop could summon a Templar. No king could tax Templar land. No parish could take a tithe out of a Templar field. The number of superiors the Order of the Temple answered to, anywhere in the world, was 1. Look at what that actually is as a commercial arrangement, because it is not what it looks like. Take the tithe alone. Every other landholder in Christendom hands a share of what comes off the ground to the local church. Every year. In perpetuity. It is the single most reliable charge on farming income there is. The temple does not. That exemption is not a one-off grant. It is a discount on every harvest, on every manor, for as long as the arrangement holds, and it compounds. What you do not pay out, you spend on more land. It looks like strength, and for 168 years it behaved like strength. Land came in because giving to the temple was efficient. Your gift went to the Holy Land rather than into a bishop's household, and once it was in, nothing could get it out. Kings complained. Bishops wrote to Rome. The order kept farming. But look at the shape of the thing. Every acre of it sits inside somebody else's kingdom, under somebody else's law, walked by somebody else's sheriff. The order held no territory of its own anywhere on earth. Not 1 square mile that answered to its own courts. What kept all that land Templar was not possession, and it was not force. It was a piece of writing, and a piece of writing needs somebody willing to enforce it. The order did not own its protection. It rented it from a single landlord. And in the 4 years before the arrests, that landlord moved house. On the 7th of September 1303, Philip's counselor Guillaume de Nogaret and Sciarra Colonna broke into the papal palace at Anagni and took Pope Boniface VIII prisoner. They held him 3 days. The townspeople got him out. He was dead inside 5 weeks. Whatever anyone had believed about the ceiling on royal power, the demonstration was now on the record, and every ruler in Europe had watched it. A king of France could lay hands on a pope and walk away from it. 2 years later, the next pope was crowned at Lyon with Philip standing in the church. He never entered Rome. Not once in the whole of his pontificate, a count of 0. In 1309, the papal court settled at Avignon and stayed there. Nothing about the order's land had changed. Nothing about its rents, its barns, its brothers, or its arms had changed. What had changed was that the single signature standing between it and every king in Europe was now living inside France at the invitation of one of them. Now watch how cheap the killing is. Because the protection had one guarantor, and the guarantor was in France, Philip did not need an army. He needed a mailbag. Sealed orders went out to every royal bailiff and seneschal in the kingdom, with instructions not to open them before a named morning. On that morning, they were opened everywhere at once. By nightfall, the whole French province of the order was in custody, the master and about 139 brothers taken in Paris alone. No siege, no campaign, no battle anywhere in France against an order of fighting men, in a kingdom full of their houses. He had run the drill the year before on the Jews of France. Simultaneous, sealed and finished before anybody could organize a response. The second time the target was larger. The method was identical. Now put the 2 columns side by side and watch how little moves between them. Column 1. The orders last week. Faxfleet in Yorkshire, the richest Templar manor in that county, valued at £290 4 shillings and 10 pence a year. Templehurst, down the road, at £146 18 shillings and 2 pence, most of that standing livestock and crops in the ground. The whole English holding scheduled at £4,720. I am giving you those in pounds, shillings, and pence because that is how they were written, and I am not translating them into modern money. Across 700 years of different bread, different wages, and different silver, that exercise produces a number that feels precise and means nothing. Compare them against each other instead, inside the period. Faxfleet brings in £290 in a year. Templehurst is worth £146 in total. One manor, in one county, earns in 12 months roughly twice what the manor down the road is worth standing. Column 2, the week after. The same fields, the same sheep, the same grain in the same barns, the same reeves doing the same work on the same Tuesday. A royal keeper is now sitting where the preceptor sat, and his job is to make the manor render as much as it rendered before, because he will answer for the difference. Those figures I just gave you are the king's own clerks writing down what they found, which is exactly why both columns carry the same numbers. Nothing was destroyed. Nothing was moved. Nobody burned a barn or drove off a flock. In economic terms, the seizure of the Order of the Temple in England destroyed no value at all. It transferred title, and it did so without breaking a single thing that made the title worth having. The line that changed was never written on the schedule at all, because it never had been. It was the name of the man who could say no. And at the end of it, years later, the Crown of France sent its bill. 260,000 livres tournois in settlement and expenses claimed against the estate before a single acre went where the Pope had sent it. There was a point where this could have gone the other way, and it is on paper. On the 6th of June 1306, Clement V summoned the masters of both military orders to Poitiers to answer 2 questions. The first was whether a new crusade should be launched. The second was whether the temple and the hospital should be merged into a single order. That second question is the one that mattered, and it had been in the air since Acre. 2 orders, the same purpose, the same donors, the same complaint from every bishop about the same exemptions. One order would have been harder to isolate and harder to take apart. It would also have meant that the master of one of them stopped being a master. Jacques de Molay wrote his answers that summer. 2 memoranda. On the merger, he argued against it. The orders had different missions, separate command was stronger than combined command, and a merger would take from each of them the thing that made it useful. That is the whole of what he refused, and it survives over his own name. He went to France to make the argument in person. While that argument was being conducted on parchment, the Hospitallers were putting men on an island. They landed on Rhodes in the summer of 1306. They took the city in 1310, and they held that island for 212 years, to a terminal date that sits well outside the period of this case. Rhodes was not a bigger estate. It was a different kind of thing entirely. On Rhodes, the order was the government, its own courts, its own harbor dues, its own walls, and nobody above it who could sign the ground away. One order spent those years writing about what it ought to be. The other spent them acquiring somewhere to stand. Go back to where this started. The first week of October 1307, at its greatest extent, 870 houses from Iberia to the Levant. In England and Wales, 34,400 acres under the plow, and an institution that owed nothing to anyone, anywhere. Every one of those figures is real, and every one of them reaches you inside a document written by the people who took it all. The king's inventory of what he seized survives in full, item by item, house by house, county by county. It is one of the best recorded confiscations of the medieval period, and that is not sentiment or luck. It was recorded that carefully because somebody was going to be answerable for every last sheep, and men who expect to be audited write things down. What does not survive anywhere is the order's own account of what it believed it still held on the morning of the 13th. There is no Templar book. There is only the receiver's schedule. That is why the treasure story will not die. When the only surviving accounts are the ones written by the man who took the property, every number in them looks like a floor rather than a total. The gap between what the record shows and what people expect gets filled in with gold. It was never gold. It was fields, and the fields are all still there, under other names, growing the same wheat for somebody else. Templehurst is a place you can drive to, so is Faxfleet. The wealth did not vanish on the 13th of October. It changed hands in daylight on paper, and the paper is the only witness anybody left behind. Every figure in this case was written down by the winning side. That is not a gap in the evidence. That is the evidence. An institution does not usually die with its own accounts closed neatly. It dies on the day somebody else starts keeping them.